You know, it was the most exciting day ever. It started with Jesus' teaching, and then he told the 12, we're going to cross the lake. We got some business to do over there. So they got on a boat, and about halfway over, somewhere in the lake, a big storm rolled into the lake, and it was terrifying for the disciples. Apparently, it didn't bother Jesus much. He was asleep. But they were so afraid, they finally woke him up, and so he got up and he calmed the storm. And then he asked the disciples, hey, where's your faith? Where's your faith? So then they got to the other side of the lake, and they were promptly met by a man who was possessed by a number of demons. And so Jesus exorcised them from him. He put them into a herd of pigs who then, in their madness, ran off a cliff. And the villagers weren't too happy with that. Apparently, they were more concerned about the pigs than they were their brother, who was now in his right mind. And so because they had no faith, they sent Jesus out of their village. Now, there is an application to that, by the way, which I'm not going to really address today, but I don't want you to miss it. If you don't want Jesus, he'll go away. He will. But what a day. And all along, these guys who he had handpicked, these disciples, these later who would be called the apostles, they were struggling. And so time after time, Jesus showed them, hey, this is what faith is. In this Upset Alert series, we've heard about a centurion, for instance, who had more faith, an Italian had more faith than the entire nation of Israel. Jesus pointed that out. And then we saw it last week with Dan's message where he talked about this woman who had more faith than the religious leader at the table because she anointed his feet with her tears and with expensive perfume. And then Jesus simply speaks to the wind and the sea and they're hushed. And then on the hillside cemetery, he speaks to the demons and they flee. And if the day would have ended then, it would have been like for them, the best day in their life so far. But that day brings two more examples of the impossible that Jesus brings. He asked them, where is your faith? And wherever faith happens, it's always the greatest comeback. Now, on this day, the plot gets thicker. And then the impossible happens again. Impossible comebacks on the greatest day in their life to date. Here's how the plot thickens. If you go to Luke chapter 8, verse 40. A crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at the feet of Jesus. And he pleaded with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of 12, was dying. So he's the synagogue leader, and I want you to think about this. He would have been on the opposing team of Jesus. He would have been in conversations with other synagogue leaders where they said, this guy is stealing our sheep. But I don't care what side you're on. I don't care where you fit in terms of the religious wars that people want to fight. If it's your daughter, you go to a different place, and you will beg, and you will plead for her life. I remember when my daughter Rachel was born, up to that point before she was born, I believed she would be a he. I'd even personally decided on a name, Wolfgang. Jackie wasn't going there, but I thought it was a great name. Anyway, so she emerged. Dr. Jones in Lexington said, it's a girl. And my first thought was, Wolfgangia? No, that wasn't what I thought. My thought was, I have no idea what to do with this. Because I had two boys. And I really thought it was going to be a boy. Now, I thought my heart had already gone to its deepest place when Jackie said, I do at the altar. And then when my two sons were born and I held them for the first time, oh man. Guys, you know what I'm talking about. You hold that little girl, new level of heart wrecking. And then, throughout her young life with her long, beautiful hair and the hundreds of times that I read to her at night and the fact that she only wore dresses till she was 8 years old, she was all girl, okay? And then she turned the switch. And so it's like the thousands of times I would set volleyballs to her and she'd bump them. And it was all those times that she would pitch to me in fast pitch to get her arm ready for the big game. And she was my little girl. She had my heart, still does. The man had a daughter, okay? And she was dying. And I can't imagine what it was like for him. And I don't care how many church meetings he'd been at where they were saying, we got to do something about this Jesus guy. He's taking all the people. I don't care how many times he heard people start to say things like, we need to eliminate him. It's his baby girl. And the only reason he would have even thought of leaving the deathbed of his child was that he knew he had to go and grovel at the feet of this peasant preacher. And he came and he said, help her. Now, with every great plot, there's a subplot, maybe several. Here's the subplot. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. No one could heal her. She came up and behind him and she touched the edge of his cloak. And immediately her bleeding stopped. Who touched me? He said. When they all denied it, Captain Obvious Peter said, Master, the people are crowding around you and pressing against you. So they're on a mission. They're in a hurry. This is the most important man in town, the synagogue leader. And you know he's out in front trying to part the waves. He's like, get out of the way. We're on a mission. We got to get to my house. And everybody understood it was serious. I mean, because this is a small town. And so all these formerly blind people and formerly crippled people and all these formerly lepers and maybe demoniacs and centurion servants who had been alive and well now and healed because of Jesus. So all these people want that too. Hundreds and hundreds of people crushing in on them, screaming for his help. And he stops and says, who touched me? And then Captain Obvious, everybody? You know. But Jesus says, no, someone touched me. I felt the power go out of me, which is a great phrase. I don't understand it, but it's a great phrase. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, and by the way, that was her intent, to be unnoticed. I'll explain this in a minute. Came trembling and fell at his feet. So you need to understand this woman, she would not even be in town. She wouldn't leave her home usually unless she had no other choice. Because there's a reason for this. It's found in Leviticus 15, and we can read about it. We're going to read about it a little bit. But somehow she gets through the throng. She has to push her way through numbers of people. And I think maybe in her mind she's thinking, I don't want to stop him. If I can just touch him, I think that'll do it. I don't want to keep him from going to the rabbi's house, to the synagogue leader's house, because his little girl is sick. He needs to help him. But if I can just touch him. Now think about Jairus at this point. He's probably thinking, I'm the most important man in this city. I'm in charge of their synagogue. I'm in charge of their religion. I'm in charge of their social lives, their holidays. And he's thinking, Jesus, come on, we don't have time for this. Let's go. Jesus stops and he calls out one person among hundreds. And then she steps up. She who has been bleeding for 12 years and hid it. If we read Leviticus 15, the whole chapter, you'll get more. I'm going to read part of it. But in front of the entire town, in front of this religious leader, the man who would keep her out of his synagogue, she tells her story. A story of unclean. She thought it. The whole town thought it. The synagogue leader Jairus thought it. And here's why, Leviticus 15. And fair warning, you're not going to like this. If this offends you, send your emails to Dan at thirdcitychristian. And let him, don't do it. The man's very busy. Leave him alone. But anyway, let me read this and I think you'll understand. Verse 19, Leviticus 15. When a woman has her regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last for 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean until evening. Anything she lies on during her period will be unclean. And anything that she sits on will be, you're a lot slower in the last group. They got it right away. I don't know what's about this 11:30 service. You should have the most rest of everybody. You should be like popping. Well, anyway, let's go on. I'm sorry to insult you that way. Anyone who touches her bed will be, that's the best one of the whole morning right there. They must wash their clothes and bathe in water, and they will be until evening. If a man has sexual relationships with her and her monthly flow touches him, he will be for 7 days. Any bed he lies on will be. When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues to beyond her period, she will be as long as she has the discharge, as in the days of her period. Any bed she lies on, anybody she touches, anything she sits on, during that period, anything she touches will be, and they must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean until evening. Think about that. That's her life. 12 years. Unclean. You're thinking, well, preacher, this is Palm Sunday. Why don't you just bring out some branches and do this? That would have been really nice. I got my kids in here with me. It's not a passage we're covering in Kid City today. Okay, I get it. Which is, by the way, why we encourage parents to take their kids to Kid City, because they have really good stories for kids over there. And we do talk about adult stuff here sometimes. And we don't want to keep from doing that. So anyway, this was written 3,700 years before any germ theory ever surfaced. What is the most dangerous contaminant on the face of the earth? You know what it is? Blood. God knew it. He gave laws to his people to protect them. Whole nations around them died of plagues. But because they followed his cleanliness laws, they survived. Who touched me? Every person touched him. By the way, every person she touched was unclean. Remember that? Her husband could legally divorce her. She could not go into public and attend Jairus' synagogue. No way. Unclean. All her dignity, all her value, gone. Hemorrhaging away. Trembling. Sobbing. And for the first time in 12 years, with hope, she emerges out of the crowd. And she says, it was me. In the presence of all the people, the scripture says, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. And we don't get the details of the story, but it probably sounded like, I tried everything. I went to every doctor I could think of. And then I heard about you, and I thought, you know what? If anyone can help me, it's him. But I don't want to stop him from going to help that little girl. And I don't want to make myself known here because they might stone me for being out in public. So I'm just going to sneak up, and I'm going to reach out, and I'm going to touch him, and I just think if I can get there, I believed you could heal me. A 12-year slump out of the abyss of shame and isolation. Amazing. She brought what everyone saw as her filth into the city, and she touched a lot of people, I promise you. And they're thinking, did she touch me? Because now I'm unclean. She did that. It's her fault. And in front of the entire town, she says, this is me. And then he says this, daughter, your faith has healed you. And I promise you, the guy who's got this whole thing going, Jairus, when he's going to help his daughter, the last thing he expected to hear Jesus do is to call that woman his daughter. Because he was a single man. He was a rabbi who was single. And he didn't have any natural children. And so nobody thought that was going to be said. Nobody expected that, especially about her. And by the way, he's thinking, no, I got a daughter. Let's go. Time's a wasting here. Daughter, he said to her, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. By the way, that's more than just go healed of this physical hemorrhaging issue that you've had for 20. This is him saying to that entire village, let her be. She's free. She's okay. I've healed her. I've healed her physically. I've healed her spiritually. I have healed her emotionally. Let it be. Main plot, part 2. While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, the man whose daughter is sick. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Now, if you're Jairus, look, how could you not go to the darkest place there? That unclean woman, the one that got his attention, she might have kept my daughter from getting help. On hearing this, Jesus got it. He knew that this was where he would be thinking. He said to him, don't be afraid, just believe and she will be healed. Jairus has a choice to make. Trust Jesus or go to the dark place of despair, fear, and his own law, by the way, because guess what? Somebody just pointed this out to me last hour. I didn't even think about this. For Jesus to go into that man's house, that man would have to say, I'm going to let you break the Levitical law. Because she touched Jesus. She made him unclean. Don't miss that. That's a great point. I missed it. Verse 51, when he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in except Peter, James, and John, and the child's father and mother, and he went in. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She's not dead, but asleep. And they laughed at him. They went from wailing to mocking because they knew that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and he said, my child, get up. And she did. Her spirit returned, which is a kind of important point for us to understand about death. We have a spirit. When we die, it leaves. In this very rare occasion, her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished. Well, I would think so. But he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. And of course, eventually they did. What a day. To teach them about faith, Jesus, first of all, teaches. Then they get in a boat. He calms a crazy storm that could have killed them all. And he challenges their faith. And they get to the other side, and he exorcises these demons out of this guy and makes him whole. And a whole village rejects him because they're more concerned about the pigs than the man. Then he gets back to the community. He goes in, and he promptly heals a woman who's had this 12-year bleeding issue. And then he goes in and raises a man's daughter. All to teach us about faith. All great comebacks start with believing the impossible. And by the way, this is much more than a church experience for everyone involved. Coming to church is not faith. Coming to church doesn't give you faith. I hope that it validates your faith. I hope it builds your faith. I pray that it gives you tangible ways to live in faith. But true faith is when you humble yourself, when you kneel before Jesus, and against all hope, you thrust your life before him and you say, I need help. I need help because I'm dying here. I'm hemorrhaging here. I'm afraid. I'm losing. It's much more than intellectual belief. James 2 describes faith, and it says it's not just like saying, oh, I believe in God, because he says the demons do that. That's what James said. He says that's kind of like a dead faith. Just, oh, I believe in God. Belief without action, he says, is demon faith. And that's not a ringing endorsement, if you know what I mean. James says that faith is action or it's not. It's not faith at all. It's not just hearing. It always comes with some risk. And you think about what this woman had to do to come out in the open. That's a great deal of risk in her community. And you think about what this community leader, this Jairus, had to do to go before this peasant preacher and say only he can help. That was a great amount of risk. He risked losing the whole village from the standpoint of his leadership, okay? A disgraced woman, a a synagogue leader who led the community. An action of humility that says, God, you are God and I need your help. We talk about morning of baptisms in a couple of weeks, and what you're going to witness there, God willing, it might be you that's witnessing it firsthand. It's when a person steps forward and they say, you know what, in humility, God, I can't do this, I need you. That's what that moment of baptism is. It's when we humble ourselves before the Almighty God of the universe and say, God, you're God, I'm not. Here's my life. Wash me, purify me, make me different, change me, forgive me. By the way, when we come to Jesus in humility, we find freedom from our past. One of the men who was there to witness the raising of the young girl said in 1 John chapter 1, John said this, if we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he's faithful and just. He'll forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. To be pure means that I'm freed from the past and it's a new start for me. My past is what will keep me from being right with God. And until I deal with that, until I'm free, until that comes out in the open and it's gone from me, as long as I live in the past, as long as I hide from God, I'll never find freedom. Because your past, hear me out, is the truth about you. It really is. The reason why we have such a hard time getting beyond our past is because we won't really admit it's there. And we lie to ourselves and we let the culture lie to us. We do stupid, we sin, we do evil, and we do it again. And then we say, that's not really me. I just had a dumb moment, or I have circumstances that created that. Look at the circumstances in my life. You'd be doing that too if you were me. The first step in finding freedom is accepting the past as the truth about me. Do you know what will likely be the most honest moment of your life? It will be when you finally say to God and probably to others, yep, that's me, and I don't want it to be. And I'm going to throw my life before him. I'm going to stop pretending. I'm going to come before him. I'm going to grovel at his feet. I'm going to humble myself and say, Jesus, help me. I'm going to reach out in this last bit of faith I can muster, and I'm going to fight through a crowd, and I'm going to touch the hem, and I'm going to say, freedom. Pretending and hiding only keeps me from healing and resurrection. It's taken me years. It took me years to come to that point. Even long past I attended a Bible college and started in ministry, where there's this point in my life after several years of college where I realized where I'll never be the person God needs me to be until I acknowledge the person I have been. It will always be me who will be the greatest enemy of me. And you could probably apply that to yourself. No matter who you are, if you're above the age of accountability, you have enough past to ruin you if you don't give it to him. Understand this too. Others will use your past against you. They just will. We're warned of this in Revelation. The devil is called the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses us before God. He's the master at using your past against you. He'll use it in your head, and he'll use it in the voice of others. She came out, she forced her way through the crowd, she reached up, she touched him, he healed her, but there's more. He had to talk to that village, and he had to say to them, she's my daughter. I have freed her. This is what I do for people, forgiven and free. No one could come back on her. More importantly, she couldn't come back on herself. Don't let your past rob you of your future. The best kind of forgiveness is the freedom to experience a new future. Not a future that denies your past, but a future that includes it in the story God's writing in your life. One of the beautiful things that happens through Rooted, which many of you have been through, so you know this, is there's this point where you have a chance to tell your story. And if you tell your story and it's an honest story, you're going to tell the truth about your past so you can no longer live in it. It happens at Celebrate Recovery too, where people say, okay, finally, I'm going to own up to my past. And I'm going to let God have it. And I'm not going to live it anymore. I'm free from that because I have Jesus. He's my healer. I'm not going to hemorrhage anymore. I'm not going to bleed anymore. I'm going to give myself to him. Your past can be your greatest tool. Did you know that? Have you noticed how many failures there are in the Bible? I think there's something like 1,383 names or 87 names or something that are listed in the Bible. How many of those came with failure? All but two. One was Daniel, who wrote his own memoirs. So you have to take that with a grain of salt, okay? And the other is Jesus. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, Joseph, Mary, Peter, Paul, and about 1,380 more people. All of them had pasts full of sin, and one of the reasons the Bible is so important to us is because we get to see that these were people who had failures. And we see a God who's bigger than that. A God of grace, a God of mercy, a God who heals us when we respond in faith. There's Jairus, the leader of the opposition party in that community, who probably thought of Jesus as his enemy. But she's my little girl. I'll do anything for her. And he goes and he humbly begs him to help. There's the woman in the mob who only had a small glimmer of hope. It will take the impossible, she thought. I know he's going to go help that little girl. I can't stop him. She's 12. But if I can just touch him. She came out of the shadows. She forced her way through the crowd. She took the greatest risk of her life. She touched the hem of God's robe. And he said, "Who touched me?" And some of you, you know who I'm talking to because it's you. You know that you need to reach out and touch his hem, even though you are just, you're hemorrhaging. You're hemorrhaging. You're bleeding inside. You're bleeding out. And you need him. Have you faced the truth about your past? Because honestly, as important as you seem to yourself or to others or what you think others think you are, the only hope you have is to come out in the open and say, Jesus, I need you. God, it's only you because I can't do it. Jairus watched his daughter come back to life, and he had the greatest story ever to tell in his synagogue for the rest of his life. This woman came out of the darkness, and she found healing, and she and the villagers told her story. We're still telling it today, aren't we? These are all byproducts of why Jesus came. He did not come to give you physical healing, but he did come to raise you from the dead. And that begins with a spiritual honesty. That honesty that says, I will come to him and I won't let anything stop me. Not my pride, not my fear, not my failures. Not even if I'm hemorrhaging. I'm coming. A little bit later in the service, as we're closing, actually, we've asked some folks to be up front here. So when this service concludes, if you want to come out of the shadows of your own life and you just want prayer, you want help, you want healing, there's going to be people here to help you take those steps to pray and to encourage you. So don't pass the opportunity up. Because maybe you find yourself right there in a plot that seems like it's over, hopeless, and desperate. It's the plot that you're afraid and alone in, and you just don't know where you can go now. And all that hope has to just be for the impossible comeback. And I'm here to tell you, he gives you that if you'll come. Lord, as we commune, we're remembering something really important about you. That you're a God who will bleed for his people. You came, you hemorrhaged unto death. You did it so that you could take our sins upon yourself and cleanse us. Every person here, if we're intellectually and spiritually honest, see ourselves without you, apart from you, as unclean. By your blood, you cleansed us of unrighteousness. And we celebrate that in this very profound moment as we commune together. Because of Jesus, amen. Just a reminder that we're going to offer numerous services next weekend for the Easter weekend. We always add services because we anticipate quite a few more people coming to church. And really, it's really one of the great times in the year when you can invite someone that will actually come with you to church. So you notice there's a card on your seat, and maybe around you can grab them too. But anyway, on those cards, it has the service times. So what I would encourage you to do is to circle the one that you're going to attend, and then give that to someone else that you'd like to invite with you and say, hey, I'm going to this church, I'm going at this time, and I'd love it if you would join me. And you'll be surprised how many people will take you up on that. Here's what I was thinking. I was walking in just this last service. So, is it impossible to believe that Jesus, his heart is wrecked by you? I mean, if I'm a father and my daughter, my sons, when they were just born and came into my responsibility, that they wrecked my life so completely that they did. Is it impossible to believe that you have that same kind of impact on God? That he could see you as his daughter, his son. It's not impossible to believe because we know what happened. He gave his life for you. He's wrecked by his love for us. And maybe you've tried all kinds of doctors and you're still bleeding. You've got the doctors of success and the doctors of self-help and the doctors of entertainment and the doctors of impairment and the doctors of empowerment. And you're still hemorrhaging. Why couldn't today be the day that you say, I'm going to step out of the darkness and I'm going to thrust myself at the feet of the one who says I can be his daughter, his son. Like I said, we're going to have some folks down front here after the service. And if you just want to make that kind of declaration, they'll get you started. They'll be there to pray for you. No judgment. They'll just receive you. They'll pray for you. Whatever it is that you're bleeding, just bring it. Let someone else be in on it. Reach out. Just touch the hem of Christ and see what he can do.